was an architectural rendering of a black box gallery. And this eventual installation wowed everybody at SOFA. In the hierarchy of glass, SOFA is the ultimate art fair, the art expo that happens in Chicago every fall. Flameworking is there, and Flameworking is there more and more every year, but it's honestly, there is a hierarchy, and I think Flameworking has been slower to be embraced by collectors. But wouldn't you know it, the most impressive display that has ever been shown in the glass galleries of all the art being shown at SOFA, I would argue would have been this Lutcza display from 2008, where they brought an architect in, they had this banner, it had a museum quality to it and a museum budget to it that you rarely see at SOFA, and it really put everybody on notice that Flameworking had arrived, that Lutcza had arrived, and it made tremendous impact. Here's another view of the Lutcza Gallery booth. Here's some close-ups of the actual work. On the right hand, you see these figures I'm talking about. These are, the color tones are blue and green. This is the work of the Paradiso side. The figures are rendered in white glass, and they're in these sort of cool but orderly arrangements. On the left, we see the spiral with increasingly small glass figures of angels and seraphs. And I was really impressed because there is just the sheer power of the technique that can make something smaller and smaller. As you're going up the spiral, you're getting these infinitesimally tall figures. Some of them, even as if to prove just how great he is at his technique, are holding little miniature goblets or flutes or instruments, and they're all rendered perfectly at this micro scale by hand. So it's a tremendous accomplishment and just an inspiring thing to look at. People were lined up at SOFA to look in and to go into that black box where they limited the number of people. And then this is the flip side, the other section of the installation called Inferno, which is all about the underworld. And it's very interesting about it, and I think it has a lot to do with Lutcza's own iconography, that there isn't necessarily, the pull between both sides was very strong and maybe even equal to his character in his artwork. And there's more nuance. This is not simply fire and brimstone. There's a lot of sensuality to the underworld side. There's the fire colors, there's purples, yellows, and reds, and there's a sensuality and an eroticism to it that I think is more complex than you can just simply say good and bad, good and evil. Okay, I'm gonna move on. I mean, Lutcza's done a lot of different things. We're gonna just have time to talk about very little bit of each person's work. Talking now about Carrie Russell Poole. She's a graduate of the Cleveland Institute of Art, a frequent collaborator with her husband, an artist, Mark Petrovic, who does glass hot working at the furnace, and it's a mix of processes often. This is a work called Dotted Swiss from 2009. It's a teapot motif. She has written a little bit about her relationship with her grandmother in particular, who had a very interesting teapot collection. She would bring out the different teapots. It would be a special occasion, make the everyday tea get-together into an adventure. Obviously made a big impression on Carrie about her patterns. The patterns themselves are a fascination of Carrie, and through Flameworking, she's been able to not just render the pattern, but to make the structure of the object itself the pattern, which I find a fascinating twist, where pattern is not an adornment, pattern becomes the actual structure of the object. I think it's a very clever and rich territory to mine in terms of the decorative art, where the decorative becomes subverted by the fact that this is actually the structure of the object, and what you're looking at is only decoration. So then what does that make the decoration? Is it something applied, or is it something that's worthy of further investigation and further consideration? We have the teapot on the left is called Abundance. It's 16 inches tall. On the right, we have Globe Cupcake Chalice, which is a collaboration with her husband, Mark Petrovic, which is 14 inches tall. Again, we have enclosure, we have a vessel, but it's again subverted by the fact that it's only the pattern that exists, and we have the bird form. The banded vessels, this one is called Daisy Banded Vessel. Again, we're looking at subverting the traditional form. This would, of course, could not hold water. This could not be functional in the sense of the traditional sense of the vessel. It's a timeless form, it's a beautiful form, and it's another provocation about what does pattern mean, what are the boundaries between pattern as application and pattern as structure, and the pattern and the vessel itself do not overlap. They're separated and segmented in, I think, a provocative and thought-provoking way. Finally, we look at the aromatic series. This is Tonic on the left, 24 inches. And the issue of making lemons out of lemonade was a theme in a body of work that she was doing around this same time. thinking about issues of foreign policy and relationships, and as she writes, the state of our earth. It's all coming at us faster than we can duck. I wanted to capture the moment of juggling these lemons as well as the sweetness they highlight in our lives. Again, this is taking a process, a flame-working process, into new directions, with new ambitions for provoking, because of the incredible ability to render detail, which I don't think any other process would yield these kind of results. And I think the technique is evident, and the collaborative aspects with working together with her husband on something like an issue about the bittersweet nature of lemons, I think is also probably quite rich material that has a lot of room for discussion. Moving on to Cesar Tofolo. In 2004, he's a third-generation glassblower and flame worker. His father did glassblowing and flame, and his grandfather was a very famous glassblower in Murano. Cesare began working at the age of 15 with his father. His father died 2 years later. Cesare went on to become a master of bringing together and fusing the techniques of the furnace and the hundreds of years of history of furnace technique in Venice with the relatively modern material of borosilicate, which he's been able to render in new and provocative ways that we haven't really seen before. This piece is called colori, or colors. It's a little difficult to see, but there's small figures, very miniature figures sitting on the edges of those vases. There's a sort of an animation, a kind of otherworldliness to these, both highly realistic and sort of not ordinary. They're always clearly presented, but there's something going on more than what you think when you see these little figures inhabiting and animating this work. These are called miniatures. The tallest one is 5 3/4 inches. These are still lives referencing the genre of painting in the 17th century, especially in the Dutch period. This was a very important form. Cesare renders them with, again, exquisite detail, very lifelike. He writes, asked many of these artists for an artistic statement, and he said he doesn't like explaining his work because it's possible to read them like an open book. He said he cited tradition. He mentioned that he's a third generation, and he's working with a medium that requires much higher temperatures in choosing borosilicate, for example, than soda lime, which is what Lutcza works with. He's making it more difficult for himself. He's challenging himself. He's making it thoroughly contemporary. This is a piece called Acrobats, or in Italian, Funamboli. We have a little detail on the right. Again, he's got the vessel incorporating these small miniature figures. It's lighthearted, it's sort of capricious. It has an element of tension in it with the forms, with the form itself being able to be suspended on the rope is a technical kind of accomplishment in itself. And he writes in his own writing, he says, "My works are instinctive expressions of thoughts which crowd my mind. I don't seek out a subject or an idea to create. They join me on their own. In my glass, there is Venice and the Renaissance, but also there is the modern man who lives with history." So speaking of history and tradition, I wanted to show these last two images. On the left, we have Colonna, 11.5 inches tall. Colonna, by the way, means column in Italian. And on the right, we have classic blue, also approximately the same height, 11 3/4 inches. And the final quote from Cesare, he says, "I don't create my works for others, I create them for myself. My works are the mirror of my soul, of how I am, of the environment in which I live, that which I breathe and have breathed in this life. They are my dreams and my nightmares." I'm going to quickly just touch on Yusuke Matsushima's work. He is reviving an ancient form of glassmaking, the oldest form of glassmaking that predates even glassblowing, which is called core forming. He is dripping a bead of glass or running a bead of glass over a blob of mud or other materials that are then, once the glass is cooled, they're removed. Of course, he's taken this technique to an incredible level of sophistication and delicacy. In a true Japanese sense, the work is absolutely exquisite and very finely made. This is called Lidded Blue Bowl, something he made in 2008. He was the featured artist in 2005 here at the conference. Moving on to Jinny Ruffner's work, 2006. Jinny has a BFA and an MFA from the University of Georgia in drawing and painting. She's won many awards. She's even an honorary member of the American Institute of Architects. She's obviously interested in very many aspects of design and of creating. She has had her work discussed in Art in America magazines, Art Week newspaper, among others. So she's widely hailed and understood as a very serious artist, lives in Seattle. This is Kitchen Sink Flowers. Kitchen Sink Flower. It comes from her aesthetic engineering series, which was featured in an installation at the Museum of Northwest Art in 2008. And this is a view from that installation. You can't quite see it, but there's all these elements, these flame-worked elements coming forward in 3 dimensions. This would put Avatar to shame in terms of really approaching you, the art interacting with you and coming into your frame. I think it really also shows the exuberance that I think characterizes a lot of her work. This is Making Flowers from Clouds from 2007, 16 inches tall. We see how painterly her sensibility remains, even though she's no longer working directly in this piece with canvas and paint. The media is not the focus. It's clearly a free interchange of ideas, materials, and also approach. There's a lot of confidence, there's a richness of color, a vitality, and an exuberance that I think characterizes much of her work. We're going to look here, certainly characterizes this piece. Drawing is the Language of Art from 2008, 12 inches tall. We see the symbols along the outside of the basket, a $sign, some mathematical figures. We also see this blossoming forth in the middle of color and of form. It's not a highly realistic botanical, but it certainly makes the impression of tremendous fertility and life and blooming, overflowing. One of my favorites here is a piece called Garden Transport from 2009, a wheelbarrow, flame-worked. The front wheel is butterfly figures in a sequence, and it has this extremely natural sensibility as well as these unnatural colors and kind of larger than life. It's an interesting mix. This is a piece called Out My Window, and from 2009. Again, it's a clever sense of the frame, moving not in this case from the easel, but to the actual window, looking at what you can see through the window itself being made out of the glass, clear glass in the background. I like the meditation on the material. Glass is an everyday object mixed with nature. Again, not in a highly stylized way. This is the catalog for her exhibition in 2008. It's actually a pop-up book that people were assuming was a children's book, but in fact this is distributed as a catalog and will be distributed as the catalog for this traveling exhibition, which is continuing to be shown and will be shown this September at the Bellevue Arts Museum outside of Seattle. And I think that this easiness with material, where she is now moving to paper, and she's always done drawing and graphic design as well, but how well it translates her energy and her vision into graphic design form. These are interactive. When you open the book, you all know pop-up books, but these pieces come to life. They literally spring open, and I think that's very fitting. And I wanted to just share the little quote, which is written on this wheel, on this turning wheel on the lower right, which it says, "The imagination reveals that these possibilities are everywhere and continues," as a wheel continues. I think it speaks to the cycle of creativity.